I'm live. It is Wednesday, the 12th of April, 2023, and I'm reading out of Joan Grant's So Moses Was Born. It is another of Joan Grant's farm memory books, and this is about, this story was written from the perspective of Nebunefer. He was the original royal heir to the throne of the pharaoh Seti I, but he yields the crook and flail to his younger brother Ramoses II and retires to the living water, a remote estate. There he lives in seclusion for 25 years until he's called back to the court of his brother to lend his counsel on most delicate matter. We are here now before this happens. Seti, the pharaoh, is dying, and we are just at the time before where the new heir, Ramoses, will be put into office. This chapter is entitled Pharaoh Has Spoken. It is the 9th chapter of this book. If, my dear nephew, you have reached this point without becoming unduly impatient with my story, would you prefer to read next of my journey with Sensen to the living water, or to learn something of Ramoses' first day as pharaoh? You may well ask yourself, for I am unlikely to be available for questioning, how I am in a position to offer you these alternatives. How could I know what he experienced while I was occupied with teaching untrained litter bearers to keep in step, and subduing my impatience at the implacable independence of pack donkeys? Truth, being real and therefore intangible, cannot be tested in a crucible or weighed in a merchant's scales. It shares, however, the needs of the goldsmith who demands complexity in service of his simplicity. If Pharaoh wears a pectoral, even one so conventional as a hawk with outspread wings, he knows that the materials of which it is constructed have come from sources separated by many days' journeys: lapislazuli and hematite, macrolite and glass, amethyst and carnelian. It is in the same tradition that I shall attempt to give you the truth concerning Ramoses. Some details of the pattern came to me out of his own mouth, and often his heart also. Many years later, some were described by Sensen, whose dreams were often clearly cut, as the inscription on Hatshepsut's obelisk at Karnak. Karadin provided certain useful material. He can always be relied upon to be entirely factual, which frequently diminishes the value of his evidence. I've done no more than disregard the petty confines of precedence and set, in what little gold I have, certain emotions of a man who closely concerns you and appears to be in increasing danger of being judged as a man by the gods and as a god by men instead of as Pharaoh. Whatever your inclination, I shall now tell you what befell Ramoses after I watched him take the path to Thebes and Egypt. Pharaoh has spoken, declaimed Ramoses, as though the standing corn were a hostile crowd he must subdue to his will. A small breeze rippled the field, and the tall stalks bowed their heads. He walked on towards Thebes, feeling more confident. Pharaoh has spoken, said Ramoses to a bull calf. He spoke mildly, as a captain might speak to an overzealous leader of 100, who must be reminded that there are occasions when the right of a subordinate to give his opinion shall not be exercised. Pharaoh has spoken, he said, to a white goat, whose twin kids played at her side. Now he was Ramoses, the husband, indulgently admonishing his queen for expecting him to flatter her by argument when he was preoccupied by matters of grave importance. Beside the path was a block of granite that, 2 years earlier on the way to Karnak, had slid from its greased rollers, killing 2 men, and so had been abandoned. Even though it had sunk during the inundation to 1/3 of its width, it still dominated the placid field. "Pharaoh has spoken," the boy shouted, but the crushing weight was implacable as his mother, so his voice seemed no stronger than the cheep of a quail chick. "I hate you," he cried out and kicked the invulnerable stone. Then he began to sob because the pain of a splintered toenail was not sharp enough to dull his increasing fear. He saw a stick that some herd boy had dropped. He broke it in two and crossed his arms on his breast as though the pieces of smooth wood were the crook and flail, while he vowed that from the granite he would cause to be made a statue of himself, so large that in seeing it he would forget that he had wept because it challenged the royal foot. As he drew nearer to Thebes, he became increasingly lonely. The field workers' huts were deserted, and not even a child watched the cattle that strayed across the road. In the distance he heard a thin sound as though 1,000 birds were lost in sorrow. It was then he realized that the people had gone to the city to join in the lamentations for the death of Pharaoh. He looked down at his scratched and dusty legs, the thin legs of a boy, for all that he was tall for 15. He longed to let them do what they want to do, to run very fast to find Neb. Before he could stop them, they carried him a few swift paces, and he had to force them to a standstill as though they were horses almost too wild to hold. "I cannot follow Neb," he said aloud. "If Neb knew I had run away, he would have to come back, and then Sensen would die. If I killed Sensen because I'm a coward, it would be worse than Mother killing them, for at least Mother is brave. Perhaps the gods are not very angry with wicked people who are also brave." He came to the river and saw a trading barge. It would be easy to hide amongst the jars of grain. He was strong and intelligent. If he stayed with the barge until it reached one of the smaller nomes, he could easily earn his food by looking after horses, or even cattle, if there was no one rich enough to own a chariot. He heard someone crying, a girl. Her leg, wrapped in a dirty rag, was staring at him from the doorway of a hut at the end of the quay. He stopped crying and rubbed her cheek with the back of a small and grimy hand. "Are you hurt too, boy?" He knew she must have noticed his toe, which had begun to bleed again. "It's nothing," he said hastily. "What is the matter with your leg?" He did not want to know, but it was the kind question that Sensen would have asked. "There is a sore on it, so I cannot walk very far. That is why they would not take me with them to the city." She began to cry again. "Does it hurt you much?" he said anxiously. "No, I'm used to it. When the bandage falls off, it looks horrid. But this one is nearly new, and it will last many days." "Then why are you crying?" She gazed at him in astonishment. "Everyone is crying. Don't you know that our father is dead?" He nearly said, "My father is dead too," when he suddenly realized that they were both thinking of the same man, so that is what the common people feel for Pharaoh. He wasn't remote and wise and all-powerful, as Seti had been even to his own children, or had been until he was dead. To this girl, Pharaoh was a father, for whom she wept real tears, even when there was no audience to see her weep. So the 80 days' lamentation was more, much more, than a formal gesture of respect. "Pharaoh has a son," he said diffidently. She wept afresh, rocking herself from side to side as though she had a broken doll in her arms. "He would have been our new father, is dead too. He and his wife, the princess who makes the harp sing, were eaten by a crocodile, and there is no longer anyone to protect us from the barbarians." "Pharaoh had a younger son," said Governesses. She looked around to make sure they were alone, then whispered, "He's said to be like his mother, and no one will weep in their hearts for the Queen Tuwa. You must never tell anyone I said that, though I've heard people whisper it up and down the river. I live on that barge with my brother and my uncle, and I have been to so many places," she added, by way of explanation. "You must not believe all you hear about Prince Governesses," he said fervently. "You know him?" She said this only to tease him, for how could a boy who looked so tired and dusty know a prince? "His lion boy is a friend of mine." She looked awed. Obviously it was an event of importance to speak with a boy who knew someone who had spoken to a prince. The prince has killed 3 lions in an afternoon. If Egypt is ever in danger, he will kill many barbarians, he boasted. She shrugged. If the queen tells him to do so, I expect he will obey her. Everyone says that even the great Sati, the son of Horus, let her rule him. No one ruled Sati, he exclaimed with a flare of anger. How dared this child presume to judge his father? There's no need to be cross, she said gently. Grown-ups are so often cross. It is silly for children to make each other unhappy. I must go now, and will you be all right alone? He wanted to run away again, but this time from a girl who kept on reminding him of the slow, agonizing battle of youth against blind age. I'm used to being alone, she said to put him at ease, but her quiet acceptance made his own fear of loneliness seem more unbearable. I have to go on, my mother, or my mother will be worried. He despised himself for not having the courage to admit that every moment he delayed would harm to her with fresh anger. She smiled. You have better tidied yourself or washed before she sees you. When my mother was alive, she was pleased when I tried to keep clean. Before Rameses reached the outskirts of the city, he stopped by a boundary stone, which bore the cartouche of Seti, and touching it said, Thank you very much, Father, for sending me to that girl, so that she could tell me I must try to look like Pharaoh before anyone will listen to me, even when I say Pharaoh has spoken. Now I understand how you will tell me things, even when I do not hear your voice. He wanted to be like Neb, but Neb who could enjoy killing barbarians who needed killing, so it was right that he could wear Neb's clothes. It was very important that no one recognized him before he was ready. Would Tua have sent people to search for him? She would have to pretend he was in the palace, except to those who knew her secret plan. But how many knew? Surely very few could be trusted with such a dangerous news. Was it Neb or Father who had said that his enemies were already divided against each other by jealousy? He was hurrying along a narrow lane when ahead he heard the regular tread of soldiers. On each side of him were high walls that enclosed the gardens of court officials. He saw an overhanging branch and pulled himself up until he could scramble to the top of the right-hand wall. He lay flat until the soldiers passed below him. There were 10 of them, too many to have been sent to search for him. He heard a woman weeping and peering down through heavy leaves which had already begun to droop by the morning heat. Saw Tauset, wife of the keeper of the royal granaries, sitting on a folding stool in the shade of a small portable awning. Tears, large black tears, slid smoothly as onyx beads from a greased string down her immobile face. She was studying the effect in a silver mirror held by one of her maids. Another maid stood ready with a bowl of steaming water and a linen towel. Too much cool, you fool, said Tauset petulantly, holding up her face to be washed and dried, when she snatched up the cold stick from a table that was covered with ointment pots and flasks of unguents and carefully outlined her eyes again. Pharaoh is dead, intoned the girls, their shoulders heaving in simulated sobs. Louder, snapped Tauset. If you cannot cry for Pharaoh, you shall have something else to cry for. She blinked her eyes rapidly, but the tears refused to flow to her satisfaction. Cry until I cry too, she demanded, then pinched the arm of the girl holding the mirror, who began to sob in earnest. Rameses felt more cheerful. He had always disliked Tauset and had been surprised that his mother trusted her. Cry louder, you fools. Are you such ingrates that you wish your mistress to be shamed because she cannot weep properly at the lamentations? Her voice became shrill with self-pity. Do you wish to be sneered at by the servants of the wife of the chariots or the royal barges, or even those who serve that pallid creature who contends the chief scribe? She could weep easily enough if she thought how her face resembles a bowl of sour milk. The other girls giggled nervously, then squealed as Tauset's hand left a reddening print across her cheek. You dare to laugh when Pharaoh is dead. Shall you be whipped, or must I tell your master that you have dishonored our house? The girl flung herself on the ground at Tauset's feet, imploring mercy. Ramosis was so angry that he nearly betrayed his presence. Then he realized that a similar performance must be usual at Tauset's toilet, for the girls with the mirror looked bored instead of frightened. "Get up, you misbegotten daughter of a hippopotamus, and stop growling in the dust." The girls sobbed louder and louder, and Tauset's expression became intent, as though she were trying to catch a tune. She was expected to sing and had no ear for music. Her eyelids flickered like the wings of a bat. She leaned forward, the muscles of her jaw and neck taut with effort. She seized the mirror, peered into it, then flung it at a cat that was basking in the sun. The cat screeched and ran up a tree. "Fetch me an onion," she shrilled, "and if either you let it be known that I had hid an onion in my morning flowers, I shall sell you both to a Nubian old and fat and horrible diseased." Ramosis felt happier when he swung down into the lane. It was comforting to learn that he had been wiser than Tua, even in so small a thing as judging the quality of Tauset. He went through an orchard, keeping in the shadows of mulberry trees that bordered the central water channel. Neb's garden was so familiar that for a moment he expected to see Sensen there. He noticed that a towel trailed in the water among the stalks of broken lotus and wondered who had fallen into the pool. He looked into Sensen's room and saw it meticulously tidy. Had Mina tidied it before she left with the pack donkeys, or were the other servants in her confidence? He wished he had thought to ask Neb. Surely Neb's servants could be trusted, or must he be on his guard against everyone? He went quietly through the anteroom into the main hall. He heard voices from the kitchen quarters, cheerful voices, if whoever was speaking believed that Neb and Sensen were dead. Surely they would be lamenting. He crept closer to the half-open door and listened. A woman and a man were arguing. He recognized the voice of Kia, the chief cook and kinswoman to Mina. "You can stay, but I'm going to follow them, desert or no desert," she said. "The boys won't want to come with us," her husband grumbled. "Why should they now that we have all got enough to live on without working for the rest of our lives? Buy your land and may your radishes wilt and your wine sour before it reaches the storeroom, but I'm not going to let Mina look after their kitchen. It is only my broth that she fancies when she is ill, and he likes my cooking. Wouldn't you prefer a house of our own, with only you to grumble at? You don't know the difference between my cakes and the things one can buy from a market store. Then I suppose I shall have to come with you, me and the boys and their wives. You're a good woman, though. Don't remind me I said so when next you plague me, when I don't wake early enough to pick your lettuce before the sun dries. I'm going to make this part 1 here, because somebody is using a chainsaw, and it is ridiculously loud. Bye!